Snow White, popularly known to be one of the Disney princesses, has captured the hearts of many for being the fairest of them all. Her story also proves to be enchanting, guarded by the dwarves, and saved by a prince's kiss.
But what many didn't know, apart from the fairy tale that Disney tells us, is a disturbing story of the evil queen's cannibalism and the prince's obsession with Snow White. What wasn't shown in the Disney film?
Hey guys, it's Nick.
And I'm Josh, and we're from Eventful Insights.
Today we'll be exploring the dark and twisted story of Snow White that is far from the Disney version.
Are you ready? Let's begin.
Before we start, tell us in the comments below, have you heard of any disturbing Snow White stories before?
Now let's begin by getting to know a little bit of the history of the Snow White story. Snow White is a widely recognized fairy tale and was prominently featured in Disney's first animated film in 1937 titled Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The original story is part of a 19th century collection of German fairy tales written by the Brothers Grimm, who also created other classics like Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and Rumpelstiltskin. The Brothers Grimm released their book in 1812, showcasing the narrative of Sneewittchen, later known as Snow White. This tale included many familiar elements, such as the magic mirror, the poisoned apple, the glass coffin, and the characters of the evil queen and the seven dwarfs, which continue to be beloved today.
One interesting fact is the dwarves remained nameless until the story was adapted for Broadway in 1912, at which point they were given the names Blick, Flick, Glick, Snick, Plick, Wick, and Key. In the Broadway production, Margaret Clark took on the role of Snow White. Alongside the seven dwarfs, the cast included characters such as the villainous Queen Brangoma, Berthold, the huntsman, and the dashing Prince Florimond of Caledon. The production achieved success and served as the inspiration for the silent film Snow White in 1916, where Margaret Clark also played a starring role. This movie caught the attention of a 15-year-old named Walt Disney, motivating him to reimagine the story in animated format.
As a result, Disney's timeless animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs not only rescued Disney Studios, but also played a pivotal role in transforming the company into the entertainment powerhouse it is today. This initial animated feature revolutionized the way audiences perceived animation and marked the beginning of Disney's efforts to adapt previously dark fairy tales into family-friendly entertainment. Even though Wilhelm Grimm attempted to soften and tone down some of the darker aspects of European folktales, the Brothers Grimm versions remained considerably more violent, unsettling, and geared towards adults compared to the versions popularized by Disney.
So what was the Brothers Grimm version of Snow White like? In the 1819 Grimm version of the tale, the narrative unfolds in typical fairy tale fashion, with a queen expressing a desire for a daughter. While sewing, she accidentally pricks her finger, and 3 drops of blood fall onto the snow. Struck by the striking contrast, the queen wishes for a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood in her frame. Shortly thereafter, the queen gives birth to a daughter, but tragically, she succumbs to death during the childbirth process. Then, in less than a year, the king married again, choosing a beautiful woman, but she was proud and arrogant. Concerned that someone might surpass her in beauty, the new queen consults her magic mirror to confirm her status as the fairest. Initially content, trouble arises when Snow White grows even more beautiful, leading to significant consequences.
In the Disney animated classic, the Wicked Queen instructs the huntsman to lead Snow White into the woods and kill her. Being a distrustful person, the queen specifies that the huntsman must return with Snow White's heart as evidence of the girl's demise. However, unable to bring himself to harm the innocent child, the huntsman allows her to escape into the woods. Instead, he kills a wild boar and presents its heart to the queen. But, in certain Brothers Grimm versions of the fairy tale, the queen demands Snow White's liver and lungs, while in other early renditions, she requests the heart from the huntsman. What Disney omits from the story is the gruesome detail that the Wicked Queen cooks and eats the organs brought to her by the huntsman. As one Grimm version describes, the cook had to boil them with salt, and the malevolent woman eats them, mistakenly believing she has consumed Snow White's lungs and liver.
Has that information taken you aback? What are your thoughts so far? Tell us in the comments below. Now, let's continue. That dark aspect of the narrative was delved into in a 2012 adaptation of Snow White, namely Snow White and the Huntsman. In this version, the magic mirror informs Queen Ravenna that consuming the heart of Snow White, played by Kristen Stewart, will restore the queen's fading magical abilities, restoring her everlasting youth and beauty. This adaptation marked a departure from previous cinematic versions, presenting a notably darker and more mature take on the classic fairy tale, signaling a resurgence in grisly retellings.
In the grim version of the tale, the evil queen makes 3 attempts to kill Snow White. Counting the huntsman's failed attempt, it adds up to 4. In Disney's animated adaptation, however, the queen makes only 1 attempt using a poisoned apple. Disney simplified the storyline for 2 main reasons. The most apparent reason is time constraints, but they likely omitted the first 2 attempts to avoid portraying Snow White as overly gullible by being deceived 3 times, which might undermine her sweetness. In the initial attempt, the queen, disguised as a peddler, sells Snow White tightly laced corset strings that cause her to lose consciousness. The dwarfs return home, loosen the laces, and revive Snow White. In the second try, the queen, again disguised as a peddler, uses a poisoned comb, but the dwarfs remove it, and Snow White wakes up. The third attempt involves the queen disguising herself as a crone and using a poisoned apple. She deceives Snow White by making one side of the apple tainted and the other safe, taking a bite from the safe side to entice Snow White to eat the poisoned half. The Disney version closely follows this narrative. In Snow White and the Huntsman, Queen Ravenna employs an illusion to transform into William, someone Snow White trusted from her childhood.
Now, what about the prince? Was there any disturbing story about the prince? In the Disney version, Snow White and her prince meet once when she's working in the palace. He hears her singing, approaches her, and they instantly fall in love. However, Snow White, feeling embarrassed in her ragged clothes, runs away. Later, when the evil queen tricks her into eating the poisoned apple, Snow White makes a wish for her prince to come. After taking a bite and falling unconscious, when she wakes up, it's as if her wish came true. In the Grimm version, however, the prince stumbles upon Snow White in her glass coffin in the forest, surrounded by mourning dwarfs. Captivated by her beauty, he asks if he can buy her, but the dwarfs refuse. The prince then appeals to their emotions, saying, "Give her to me, for I cannot live without being able to see Snow White. I will honor and respect her as my most cherished one." The dwarfs, not finding it as unsettling as people might, allow the prince to take the glass coffin. The prince and Snow White meet for the first time after she awakens. Furthermore, in the 1812 Grimm version, the prince's obsession with Snow White takes an even more unsettling turn. His fixation on her beauty is so intense that he finds it impossible to eat unless he is in her presence. To ensure he is always close to her, the prince has his servants carry her coffin around the palace. Eventually, one of the servants, driven to frustration, opens the coffin and strikes Snow White, exclaiming, "We are plagued the whole day long, just because of such a dead girl." This blow unintentionally dislodges the poison apple, bringing her back to life, and she agrees to marry the prince.
Now, what about the queen? In the Disney animated film, the queen, disguised as an old woman, dies by falling off a ledge. After the 7 dwarfs chase her for poisoning Snow White, lightning hits the ledge she's on, causing her to fall. Although we don't see her body, the vultures looking at her like a meal suggest that she likely didn't survive the fall. In the Grimm version, the evil queen's death is much more gruesome compared to the Disney version. In the Grimm story, the queen is invited to a prince and princess's wedding. Before attending, she checks with her mirror and learns that Snow White is still alive. Despite her fear, the queen goes to the wedding, desperate to confirm Snow White's existence. Upon arrival, they make her wear iron shoes heated red hot from the fire, and she dances until she dies in agonizing pain. Ultimately, the brothers Grimm aim to teach moral lessons to children, but traditional folk tales, such as Snow White, provide valuable life lessons for people of all ages. These stories, like a mirror, reflect the darker aspects of human nature, urging us to be brave and use our intelligence.
What are your reactions upon learning some of the dark versions of the Snow White story? Tell us in the comments below.
If you enjoyed watching this video, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching.